often that I get to make the mic taller. Thank you. 13 years ago, on this very stage, in fact, I got engaged. And I was married to Warren Morrow for 7 years. Before one morning, when he woke me up, clutching his chest, told me that he couldn't breathe and I should call 911. And those were pretty much his last words to me before collapsing in my arms. As I was standing there, I realized my life changed within minutes. There I was, 31 years old, and I was facing the future that we had planned together by myself, left to raise our daughter on my own. So as you can imagine, the next several months and a couple years after were a fog of epic pain and anger, sadness. And I didn't really have time, and quite honestly, the interest in whether or not I would ever love or be loved like that again. So fast forward 2.5 years later, I get an email from a college boyfriend who didn't know what had happened, had no idea of my status, found me on social media and just sent me a note to say hi. And he said, hey, if you're ever in New York City, you should give me a call. Maybe we'll go out to dinner and drinks. Well, unbeknownst to him, I actually had a trip planned a few weeks after that for a conference in New York, and I decided to take him up on his offer. While it was clear pretty soon into the dinner that we would probably never again be a romantic match, it didn't feel as awkward as I thought it would to be out with another man. In fact, it lit a spark in me that was completely unexpected. He and I got to talking about dating, and he asked me if I'd ever tried the app Tinder. And I was unfamiliar with it, so then and there I got a complete tutorial. And the writer in me was fascinated because at my fingertips I would have photos and profiles, like these mini character sketches. So I downloaded the app, and I got home, and I told some of my single girlfriends about it. And there we were, like a bunch of teenagers, swiping and giggling and looking at our phones all the time and messaging each other about what we'd see. And we decided, you know what, we should have some rules. So one rule was no dead animals in the photos. No offense to the hunters, just not into that. Another rule was no gym selfies. Those are not impressive, or as impressive as you think. The third rule was no kids, because we were there to date adults, not children. That comes later. So those were the rules. And as life would have it, days would go by, and I wouldn't have time to get on the app. And so when I'd get on, I would forget was left good, bad, match, not. And in one of those states of confusion, I swiped on a guy whose photo was mostly his kid. And it said, you're a match. And I thought, crap, I just broke a rule. But I said, you know what, whatever. Half of those things never go anywhere, not going to think about it, just kind of let it go. So after a couple of days, my fascination with the app just kind of waned. It lost its luster, and I thought, I don't want to do this. So I was going through the messages to uninstall the app when I get a message from Nate, that accidental swipe. And of all opening lines, he asked me why I had swiped on him. And I thought, okay, well, I can't be honest and say, because I don't know my left from my right, sorry. So I went back through, and I looked at his profile, and I noticed that in a couple of photos, he was wearing a fedora. And I thought, oh, I'll go with that. I like fedoras. I wear them sometimes. He wore it well. So I complimented his hat choice. And from there, we went on to have a lively messaging session. And we were on there for a couple of days. We graduated onto texting each other. And again, like a preteen with no life, looking at my phone more than ever. About 2 weeks after, we both won tickets to the Funny Bone and thought, hey, this might be a good opportunity to meet in person. So we made plans, we got sitters, and the day of, life kind of got in the way. We weren't going to make it to the show, but we decided we would still go out for drinks. Well, my jaw about fell to the ground when he pulled up in a 1990 Dodge Dynasty. Not because those cars are super sexy or super cool, but because they're pretty rare. I mean, you don't see them very often. But more than that, because Warren drove a 1990 Dodge Dynasty while we were engaged. And I'm not really one for signs, but I have to admit that got in my head a little bit. But I told myself, nope, just go in there and see if you can even do this. And we talked for hours, and I laughed so much that when I got home that night, my cheeks hurt. And I hadn't laughed that much or that genuinely in a really, really long time. I found myself looking forward to the company of a man again and feeling hopeful in a way that I hadn't since Warren died. So we started to spend more and more time together. And one day before going out, he says, I have something to tell you. And I thought, oh, this is it. He's going to tell me that he's been married this whole time, or maybe he's got a bunch of kids, or some equally terrifying fact about himself. So I braced myself for some terrible confession. I said, yeah. And he said, I Googled your husband. And I was kind of speechless because, yeah, he knew I was a widow. I'd mentioned his name. But I'd been very careful about what I shared because I'd heard from other widows that when they started dating again, the men didn't really like to hear about their old life. They didn't want them mentioning this other man. So I was very taken aback, and I said, well, what did you learn? And he said, well, he sounded like a really cool guy, and I understand why you talk about him with so much love and admiration and respect. And that response really kind of blew my mind. It sort of validated that I had chosen a good person, and that even though Nate and Warren are vastly different, at their core, they're kind and they're thoughtful. They have a good heart, and they shared those values that were important to me. It was also a testimony and kind of a learning moment for me in that I'd gone into it a little bit blind, naive, not knowing what to expect, not really having expectations. And yet here I was learning that perhaps my one chance at love wasn't just once, and that maybe I was going to have that opportunity to love and be loved in the way that I had known before. Thank you.